All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're joined here by me, the host of the Your Normal podcast, Blake Russell, and I'm joined by a very dear friend of mine. I'm really excited that you guys get the opportunity to listen to a conversation with me and this individual, Mark Richard. How's it going, Mark?
Good. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Mark. So this is going to be a recurring thing that I do with the Your Normal podcast, and I appreciate you being a good sport here, Mark. For my listeners, I had sent Mark a um, a little to-do list before this podcast started to describe himself in 5 words. That's the only thing he had to go off of. No follow-up questions were allowed. And Mark, I'm going to go ahead and announce the 5 that you gave me. Okay.
Let's hear it.
So Mark went with producer, actor, political junkie, gamer, national park enthusiast. Um, and I know you very well. And for the listeners that don't know you, I think this is a really good list. But obviously, I do not believe this encapsulates who you are as a person, Mark. Do you believe this?
I would say that's correct.
So I want to do an exercise. If you'd be a good sport again, I want to do a stream of consciousness of sorts. I just want you to tell the listeners, everybody listening, who Mark Richard is as a person. I'm going to give you no other prompts other than that. So, Mark, who are you?
Okay. I'm Mark Richard. I was born in Jefferson City, Missouri, to two wonderful parents, Tom and Cindy Richard. I'm the youngest of 4 children. I've got Alan and Lisa and Katie as wonderful siblings who have been a great guiding light for me pretty much my whole life, being the youngest. From an early age, I had an interest in doing voices and who the people on the screen that I was seeing in movies and TV shows were. I had a fascination with storytelling, and I was like that quintessential kid that was like kind of always like daydreaming, I guess, when I was a kid. I did like a bunch of stuff that like I'd say most kids from Jefferson City grew up. I mean, I had a pretty wide variety of activities that my parents put me in. I was involved in sports. I was involved in all kinds of like clubs around town. But I wasn't even thinking about acting at all. And then a friend was auditioning for a production of Oliver Twist at the Little Theater in Jefferson City, and asked me if I wanted to go and audition with him. And I was like, I don't know what that entails, but sure. And I went and I got the show, and I had a great time. And that kind of put me on a path of just seeking out opportunities to perform wherever they like popped up. And so I was very active in addition to everything else that I was doing to do a lot of plays. I started taking voice lessons when I was 12. So I was doing a lot of musicals. I have a neighbor who is a singer who's doing vocal exercises right now. So you're welcome for the added entertainment value to this podcast.
Hell yeah, let's do it.
I grew up doing all that. I was in all like the big musicals and whatnot in high school. I really didn't think that I would be pursuing a career in the entertainment industry at that time. While I think at that point I was, whether I liked it or not, known as like the theater guy or like the singer guy. But despite that, like I didn't myself think that was an option really. So thankfully, because my parents were so supportive and could read between the lines of me hemming and hawing about what I wanted to get involved in and wanted to do, they took me aside while I was considering a life path that would have put me towards being a lawyer or something of that sort. And they were like, do you want to do theater? And I was like, well, you can't make a career out of theater. And they were like, well, why don't you go for it? So I missed the audition at Southeast Missouri State. They had like an audition weekend, you come down, but my mom somehow was able to swing an audition with like the head of the program. And I like auditioned by myself in this giant thing. And I just did basically like a lot of from the show Oklahoma, which I had just done at Jeff City High School. Got into that program, studied musical theater at Southeast Missouri State. I did a summer internship in New York City at an acting studio called the Neighborhood Playhouse, which changed my life forever. I returned to Jeff City to save up money with like a renewed focus and like vigor for what I was doing. And I worked my butt off. I
Let me stop you there, Mark. Let me stop you there. Can I stop you there?
Go for it.
I appreciate you giving this this exercise genuine thought, and I cut you off there for a reason, because at that point in your life, I personally had known who you were. We knew each other in high school. We had this running like joke when we'd see each other in the hallway. We would like scream each other's names at each other. Hey, Mark, you know, and it was like a whole thing, just kids being kids.
Super not annoying for anybody else in the hallway.
It's something that to this day, like I'll be on a walk and I'll just be like, Ma, like it's a weird thing, man. It's weird. But I would also think it's fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that we were like super close in high school. Yeah.
No, I'd say that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. And then at that point in your life that you had just gotten us to, you were here working. You were working at the Eris pizza place and Eris Bistro in town. For people that don't know, in Jefferson City, it's a very famous local Italian, like pizza and Italian restaurant. Yeah.
More Greek style, but yes, there are some Italian elements for sure at the bistro.
Damn it.
Sure.
All the Jefferson City people are going to kill me for that. My bad. So, but anyway, at that time we were in our early 20s, both of us. And we kind of hung out with somewhat of the same circle. At least there was some overlap. And we would see each other at bars all the time, because that's kind of what we were doing. Like we were working and we were trying to figure out who the hell we were, and we were just idiots. And then we would go drink and it was fun. And you and I started like talking a lot more. And I remember one night I like stumbled down the stairs at this place in Jefferson City. It's called Bones in the Alley. If you're like 21 or younger, which is weird to say if you're younger, but honestly, that's what it is. I would highly recommend going. At this point in your life, maybe not if you're 25 plus. I don't know. But I stumbled down those stairs, and I remember I was like at a point in my life personally that I was like, I don't know what the fuck I want to do. I'm in Jefferson City. I love everyone that's here, but something in me was like telling me I need to get out of here. I can't, like, I was going down a path that like I was going to be a teacher and coach, and I was going to live in Jefferson City. And I knew in my heart that's not what I wanted. And I was still living with my parents at the time. And you were downstairs at Bones talking to some girl. I don't remember who it was. It doesn't matter.
Mention names. That's fine.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm feeling courageous, and I know Mark has an apartment, and I need to get out. I need to start this process for myself. So I stumbled up to you and I was like, hey man, you have an extra bedroom? And you were like, yeah. And I was like, I think I want to live in it. And then you were like, okay, totally. And then from there, is that how you remember the story? Is that how you remember it?
I was on a very weird encounter that evening.
Okay. Yeah.
It was a very uncomfortable social situation that I was in.
Sure.
And my company at the time stepped away to use the ladies' room, and then you were very drunk and you walked up to me. That's pretty much how I remember it. And I remember being like, oh man, like I wish that you wouldn't walk away right now, because this is a very awkward date that I'm on. But yeah, that's how I remember. It's funny to hear your thought pattern beforehand.
Yeah, it was such a big moment for me. Like I was like, I gotta get out. And for you were like, just hang out with me, please. But yeah, I bring up that story because from there we go on to be roommates, and then that led to a lot of nights of really deep discussions. And like you started asking me questions that nobody had ever really asked me, like, what do you see yourself doing in 5 years and shit? And I was like, I don't fucking know. I don't know. And then it kind of changed like my frame of thinking. And it really, I'm sure you recognize this at least a little bit. I don't know if I've ever said it to you directly, but like you living with you and becoming really good friends with you, like shaped me into being a more courageous person. And I attribute it to like why I'm at the point in life that I'm at. Like I'm in St. Louis, I'm more settled. I'm working in a profession that I'm proud of. And it all started that night at fucking Bones, man.
It's weird.
Yeah.
It's great, though. That's really cool.
Yeah, man.
That's very nice of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Mark. That all aside, we were mentioning like being in Jefferson City at that time, and I identify as somebody that's an open-minded, more liberal politically and culturally That's kind of how I, view the world. And I think it's fair to say, I won't put words in your mouth. I think it's pretty similar for you. But we grew up in a pretty conservative town, politically, culturally, all of it. And I know you grew up conservative. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit about that, like going from being a more conservative minded young person to where you're at today.
Sure. I would say for most people who can relate to that, I wouldn't classify it as any one thing shifted it. It was a collection, much like anything. I would say where I started like really seeing a change within myself was uh, when you're doing theater, especially at like the middle school and the high school level. Um, for varying reasons, the theater attracts a lot of kids that um, are just looking for a, like a support system because they're the kids who are like really interested in it, and they're the kids who like are they they love the environment. Because for anybody who didn't grow up in that, it's a very supportive and warm and lovely environment to be in. um, you do so many exercises that challenge you to be out of your comfort zone, and yet you're constantly reminded that it's okay, and that like it's okay to fail. And I feel, and this is just like my two-bit hackery maybe showing, but I feel like that's so important for a lot of kids. um, and so you just have like a lot of kids from all these different walks of life coming in one place, where that might not be the case in a lot of other clubs or activities whenever you're growing up. um, and you when you're doing theater or anything artistic, um, there's a like an open-mindedness and like a acceptance of anybody who comes through the door, because like you come through the door and like you're shown up to play, and like it's like a fun, great thing to be a part of. And I would see these kids my age, or a little bit younger, who were very much struggling with who they were, whether it was like their their sexuality themselves, or just feeling like they didn't fit in elsewhere. You'd see all these kids who were interested in things, who didn't maybe feel comfortable expressing that outside of the theater. And so I would see like a lot of kids just get bullied, who I had seen in like theater classes like really shine. um Even if like they didn't like have like, there were some kids who were better singers than others, but the kids like who still weren't good singers but they showed up and they gave it their all, like that's a great thing to be a part of. And I would see those kids um struggling with who they were in any other facet, really have a hard time. And it really started to shape my mind differently. I remember being like very against the idea of homosexuality at a point in my life. I was like very vocal and very against it.
About how old were you during that, like 14, 15, something like that?
Yeah, I would say like freshman going into sophomore year. You see, kids who are struggling with all kinds of stuff, um, just getting treated totally different than other kids. And it really kind of opens your eyes to like that path towards like people are different than me, but that's okay. Like it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be a scary bad thing. And I don't think that's indicative of Jefferson City. I think that's like
Mhm.
a very American
Yeah.
cultural thing. But yeah, like for me, it was just like seeing like um, people who weren't fitting into the traditional lanes of what Jefferson City dictated, um, having a really hard time with it. And um, that kind of, and then obviously I went into college, studied musical theater, and that was like kicked into overdrive. Because that was like, I can't even think of one student that we went to school with who was openly homosexual. And here I am in this theater program, college, where I'm very much surrounded by a lot of guys who are openly homosexual. And that like was like the final nail in the coffin, because they went from like it went from like a like a mindset of like, these people are so gross, to, man, these people are getting treated really poorly, to, man, these people are like really wonderful. And then you finally have the real, like, these people are people. And
Yeah.
then it just, you get snapped out of that, like, at least for me. um
Can I ask you something about that?
sure.
Because when I'm listening to you tell that, and you recounted that pretty eloquently. When I was hearing you say that, my mind started thinking like, why, like, you had exposure to it, like you had exposure to a different culture, um, and it was like a gradual kind of effect on you personally. Do you attribute it solely to the exposure that you had? Because when I was hearing you say that, I was like, well, why are other people that still condemn people for being who they are, why have they not like had this kind of well-rounded view of the world and changed their way of thinking? Like, what is holding them up? Do you think it's just the exposure?
I I don't know if it's just the exposure, but I know that, like, when you make friends with someone who is like crying because like they feel like they can't like hold the hand of the person that they love like in public, it tends to like, I, that's very much like a human, like that's a human in pain. And
Hmm.
um I feel like if anybody has a drop of empathy within them, I feel like most people would feel the same in that situation. It I exposure, I think, definitely has a large part of it, because you and I were saying on like the phone the other day, uh, at Jeff City High School, I couldn't think of anybody who was openly homosexual, and they would have they would have a lot of girl friends who would all say like up and down like, oh, he's totally straight. In fact, he's dating Mandy at Blair Oaks, and you'd be
Yeah,
like,
like vouching for him. Yeah.
yeah, like, and you're like, what? And you look back on it, and you're like, that's really sad. Um,
Yeah.
like that's a bummer that like, being a teenager is hard enough with figuring out who you are without the additional like whatever on top of it that like is imposed on you by the culture that you're growing up in. And again, I don't think this is indicative of just Jefferson City, um, but it is one that like I very much had an effect on me. Um, and I would encourage that anybody listening to this podcast, that I would encourage anybody to encourage those young ones in your life to go after something similar, because whatever they're passionate about, um, because it could open your mind up in all kinds of ways, and you have no way of knowing until you're there.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to kind of speak to people directly there, because I do think it's important. Um, and I don't know if you want to go down this path, and if you want to steer away of this, that's cool. But I think also part of what was shaping your mindset toward that specific issue, and probably other issues, we don't um, have to stick solely to this, but I know you were raised Baptist. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you want to speak a little bit about that, like what that was like growing up, and like where you kind of align now?
Sure. This is something I think about fairly often. And yeah, I grew up very immersed in the church. Um, and like anything, I don't think it was one thing that like lead me to think differently. Um, but yes, that certainly did have an effect on my worldview. Totally. If you're listening to anything, whether it's Colin Cowherd talking to you about like Drew Brees and Tom Brady and like, that matchup, like if you're hearing Colin Cowherd talk once a week for an hour on his radio program, you're going to be influenced by what Colin Cowherd's going to say. And very much the same. For good and like bad, I don't want to cast it like my time in the church was terrible, because I have a lot of really wonderful, sweet, warm memories of my time
Mm-hmm.
doing that. But yeah, just for me, like, not to touch on it too terribly much because I don't want to offend anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But I just started having doubts about um, certain things, and the answers that I was getting from um, the preachers that I was talking to didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And I was seeing how things were conducted at, like in that community, and like the things that I didn't agree with left a really poor taste in my mouth. And I don't know, I just started like thinking about like all of like the sermons I'd sat through where like we were hearing all in all about the evils of, you know, homosexuality, or like pick, you know, your, I don't want to be a one note Johnny and just talk about that, but I mean
Yeah.
pick anything that it can, and I don't know, I came to a place where like what I was hearing in church and what I was seeing outside the doors of church like weren't matching. And I don't know, I found like more, in my experience, I found like more genuine connections and like support systems outside of the church, and answers that like made a lot more sense to me than what I had grown up with.
Does anybody come to mind in terms of influences or encouraging you to think more critically? Does anybody come to mind during that span of time for you that like was very influential and like kind of get you to think a little differently?
Yeah, I mean, um, yeah, I mean, my brother's a huge influence. I mean, all my siblings are a really big influence on opening my mind up. They had all traveled the world quite extensively, and um, I feel like, at least in my situation, um, I very much grew up thinking that like everything in America was star spangled awesome, and there's a lot of things to be proud of in this country.
Mm-hmm.
But there, like I had like teachers like Laramie Thompson or um, Nancy Hecklenberg, who like were encouraging me to like open my mind up a little bit more. Certainly every theater and like vocal teacher I ever had like opened my mind up to a lot of that stuff as well. Um, yeah, people who just it's easy to like get stuck into like that mindset, and I was very very fortunate to have a lot of people who were pulling for me and gave me the kind of support that I needed, because there are a lot of people who aren't so lucky, and so yeah, I consider myself very lucky to be in the position where I am in, and it's definitely on the shoulders of other people. I mean, I could name 100 people from Jefferson City who like
Mm-hmm.
all encouraged and like supported me along the way.
It's a beautiful thing too, because that I want to stay in this lane, but I kind of want to transition to, you were in the creative arts, you were in theater, you were in choir, and I played sports. Like we were on opposite ends of this, for lack of a better term, thing in our town and in our high school, right? I grew up, I was an athletic child, and my dad always had a game on the television, and like that's just something I immersed myself in from a very young age. And then my brother played football in Jefferson City. And for anybody that doesn't know about Jefferson City and football, it's very important to the town, and it was very important to me at the time. There was a head coach there named Pete Atkins. He was like one of the winningest coaches, I don't know, in the country or definitely the state of Missouri for a long time. They had all these state championships, and it was just something that like people in the town really cared about. And I played football, and I like immersed myself in that. But I feel I felt lucky because my brother, who's about 5 years, almost 5 years older than me, he went through it first. Um, and he played football. And my brother's always kind of been his own person, right? Like I don't want to call him an outcast because he's not an outcast. He's a free thinker. And he never really kind of bought into that stuff. And like I got to see it firsthand as a young child who was like kind of naive to everything. And I was like, huh. And then when I went through it, like I was able to enjoy it, but I was also able to be like, this is small. And like to me, I mean, it was probably bigger to other people, but for me, it felt like this is just football, and like I'm gonna graduate, and like I care about everybody. So I don't know, it affected me in a way that I definitely saw the side of like what I don't really align with, which is like that football is everything, and if you don't play football, then you're the boosters are going to spend $1.5 million or whatever on the facility, and if you're not in that life, then whatever, good luck to you, kid. And you were on the other side of this. Like, I'll let you speak to it, but you told me that you thought about playing soccer and things like that when you were growing up, and you were good enough to play soccer, but you just you didn't really see the point. So I kind of want to I want to hear your thoughts on like being somebody that was in theater, in choir, within that kind of culture in our town.
Yeah. You know, we were lucky to grow up in a place that had a dynamic sports following, um, and I feel like my time there, like we had a very strong choir and theater program and all of that, and that was wonderful because a lot of kids don't have that experience, right? But for me, yeah, it was just frustrating, I suppose, to a sense. I mean, I am very happy, and it's very clear to see the benefits of anybody who like does organize sports like growing up. You don't have to like be playing sports, like you don't have to be the star, but like it teaches teamwork and humility and all those wonderful values and
Camaraderie. Yeah.
yeah, and I am by no means am I taking away from the positive elements of sports.
No doubt. Yeah.
I guess my problem at the time was just like the focus. The whole town was focused on this like dying dream of the town. Um, in my
Define,
opinion,
define dying dream.
I I mean Jefferson City was a dynasty in
Yeah.
football for a very long time, and
Mm-hmm.
it was very much the pride of the town. So like I can totally see why it like was the pride of the town.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my frustration at the time was like we had um, all these like incredible guys on the drum line or in band. We had a jazz like ensemble that was like unbelievable, and we had an incredible. I mean, there was incredible like lifeblood of like creativity in that school, but the preference was like always just like was so ridiculous. Like growing up, I mean, like you mentioned, like yeah, the Booster Club raised $1.5 million for like that new stadium, and that's cool. My problem being like what was the state of the building that we went to high school in? Like how like
It's
how
falling over on top of the hill.
yeah, like hey, what version of the textbooks were we using in our classes? Like that I had a real problem with that growing up, and not that I think that anybody on the football team was like deified by any means. It was just um for someone who wasn't in that lane, you had to like really really search for like support, and you had to like really look for, I mean I had to like really work to get my friends to come out to see productions that I was in. um it was a really tough thing. It really meant the world whenever you would see like a fellow student come up to you after a show that you were in, because like there weren't that many.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a weird feeling like being again not unique to Jefferson City, but one that I would love to see change in Jefferson City. I would love to see like more kids be encouraged to like selfishly become like videographers or filmmakers or
Mm-hmm.
anything to that extent. Just because, yeah, I feel like in some respects, like when we were going there, it was like we were chasing a dream, like as a school, and like I was like, but like the drumline's winning like national
I know, man.
championships.
It's interesting for me to hear you talk about like the drum line and these kind of things, because like I don't know if it was just me or if in general when you're in high school you have a tendency to kind of think more egocentrically. You're just thinking about like, okay. And when you said drumline, I remember all that the drumline was to me at the time, and I'm like almost ashamed to admit this, was like, oh man, this like gets me amped to like go out
Yeah,
and like
it's the
play
hype train,
football.
dude. Yeah,
Like,
dude.
dude, this feels, and like I didn't they were I couldn't tell you. I thinking back, I have no idea who's on the drum line. Couldn't
Yep.
tell you. I couldn't tell you anything about it. But for me, it was just like, oh yeah, they're there to get me hyped. And it's like, and I wasn't even really playing in the games. Like it doesn't make sense.
And I should clarify, like I think it's I think that there should still be a super strong support for that football team. I just think for me there was like a clear divide. It was like either you did sports or you did this, and or if you were one of the few people who did do that, it was like considered like a crazy thing. Like I remember like when we when we went into freshman year, we had a bunch of guys like singing, which was great. And then um, a bunch of us like got into like the top choir the next year when we went to the sophomore year. And I just remember like everyone being like, oh my God, there's so many football guys in this class. This is great. This is crazy. And I remember at the time being like, so because Travis Ruth can bench press like my house, he also can't have a wonderful singing voice.
I know,
Like,
man.
like what? Like, so like, but if he weren't playing football, would you be like, if you were just like a guy singing, like would that be noteworthy to you? Like would he still be like, I just remember like being like, you're more than just one thing. Like i
Mm-hmm.
I remember being like, I remember talking to a girl where I was giving this girl a ride somewhere and I put on Metallica and she was like, you listen to Metallica? And I remember being like, yes. She was like, oh, I thought you just, because you're like the choir guy, like I thought you just listened to Josh Groban all the time. And I remember being like,
Just Josh Groban, exclusively,
and
solely Josh Groban.
I love
You
Josh
just
Groban.
cry. No, he's great. He's great. But like,
Right. I just remember being like, I'm not just like crying and writing poetry in the corner when I'm home. Like, and again, I just,
it,
I living in Los Angeles, you see a lot of people who like at their school, they were encouraged to go do like everything to like, and I feel like culturally where we grew up, there's still very much like this, like, well, if you let your son get into the arts, like, I don't know, is he even a man? Like,
yeah.
not that extreme. Like, I don't want to think that anybody's like a cartoon bad guy thinking that about their kid, but like,
Mm-hmm.
I just think that like the value in it is totally like, I mean, it's totally like shoved aside.
It's secondary. At best it's secondary, right? Like,
Because like I think of all the great things that like playing sports teaches you, but then I think about like for all the people who suffer from like stage fright or speaking in front of crowds, how nice would it have been at a developmental age like that to where like there was like an improv club that like met and like would do like improv classes and then like I don't know, put on like an improv show. I remember in high school like wanting that so bad. But of course being like deathly terrified to do it, so I didn't do it. But improv is like shown to like help people who like have like they feel like they're stuck and they can't get a thought out. And
mm-hmm.
I think about like just like that one specific example or like dance or like any like that you had to do in like any of those productions. It certainly teaches you some skills as well. And I just hope that I don't know. Go see if you're in like if you're in Missouri when it's safe to go support one of the schools because they're still doing great work at Capital City High and I know Zach McKinney's killing it over at Jeff City High School too. I just met with a bunch of those students actually right before the world went on lockdown. I was in
Yeah,
Jeff
I remember
City,
you talking about that. Yeah.
so like
And I don't mean to cut you off there. I just wanted to kind of toot your horn for a second because I was going to bring this up even if you didn't bring it up because you were mentioning people that supported you. I mean, you alluded to a few people, and it is going to segue into like life in LA. But before we get there, I just want to say I think it's really crucial and I think it's really wonderful that you give back in that way because whether progress has been made or not at that high school, I think you going back and showing other kids that there's life beyond and there's your goals are attainable and you can have a career in the industry, whether you're Zac Efron or George Clooney or whoever the hell you like. You don't have to, you can have a career in it no matter what you're doing. So I think you going back to that town and doing that for those kids is a really wonderful thing, man. I do.
thanks man. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think of like all the I think of like all the times growing up where I mean, like I mentioned earlier, like I didn't think you could make a career out of it. And so, yeah, when I am back home, the last time I was back home for an extended period of time, yeah, we did a day with the kids from both high schools, and I would very much, I mean, if everything goes according to my master plan, I'll be able to come back and foster some kind of a relationship to. I'd love to give kids some kind of guidance because growing up my opportunities of like performing were like musical theater, maybe a play, certainly no film.
Mm-hmm.
But there you don't really have anybody giving you direction as to like this is how you achieve this or like this is like a way that you could go do this.
Hmm.
I would say even until like me like being out here like for a year, I still didn't really know what the hell was going on until
Yeah.
like about a year until after I moved to Los Angeles.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of like my successes have been at the result of me feeling horribly because I didn't know what the hell is going on a film set out here. And if I can prevent some kid from making a dumb mistake or whatever, I'm more than happy to go back.
Or
And
just to like remove that part of the process entirely for them, like the unnecessary, like, just to like make it a little bit better for them.
yes,
I want to get into you going to LA. But going from stumbling up to you at Bones and your awkward encounter and then becoming roommates to like actually becoming roommates and really fucking good friends, and like we've been talking for a decade now almost every day. um I personally came to a fork in the road when you had been planning on going to Los Angeles for, I don't know, years, right? And you've been working and saving up and doing everything you could to make it happen. And I got offered a teaching and coaching job in a town that's in the outskirts of Jefferson City. And in my gut, I was like, I don't want to take this. I don't want to take this. But like every like I for the last 4 years, I had been working on like that. But I remember you were going out there, and I saw an opportunity to just bail. I was like, I don't want this. I don't want to do this. And I was like, can I come? And you were like, yes. And then we went, man. We took 3 days. We went through the Rocky Mountains, and I saw those for the first time. We went to the South Rim of the Grand
oh yeah, I
Canyon.
forgot that was your first time seeing all that. Crazy.
Yeah, man. And this isn't about me, but like that's what happened. We went out there together, and that was about eight. It's going on 8 years now. In September, it'll be 8 years. Um, but you get there. I don't stay for very long. I move back and I start my path of where I'm at now in life. But you get there. You just mentioned it was like a year until you kind of felt like, okay, I know what's going on. Um, what have you done, man? Like, speak about what you've done in the industry and like how difficult it's been, how not difficult, your lucky breaks. Like, just talk to us a little bit about it.
Sure. I will say for anybody who's thinking about doing this, I think if like there are universal things that translate that I feel like don't get talked about enough, and that being like I think people from the Midwest out here at least have a huge leg up because we work really hard and we're like generally like really nice and kind to everybody. But yeah, like I remember like coming out here, I worked a catering job right when I got out to Los Angeles, and that job was cool. I mean, it allowed me to get like really intimately familiar with like where everything was in the city because you're driving all over creation for all these every weird event that you can think of. Um, I've worked some strange events, and then I've worked some cool events. Like I've worked the Grammys, I've worked the Emmys, like Spirit Awards. Like I've got to do all that fun stuff. Um, but yeah, I came out here. I had a few professional contacts. I had money, but it all got blown up when my car broke down. So then I was just schlepping around on public transportation in Los Angeles, which is great.
Yeah, it's the
Super
best.
great, super awesome LA public transportation.
Similar
Lovely,
to, yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry.
lovely people riding the bus with you. Um, and then
It isn't wonderful. He's lying.
but I I auditioned a bunch. I booked a couple of like national commercials, which was fun. I booked roles in like web series when I was first starting out. Um, I booked like a couple of like voiceover gigs, like all in that like those first 2 years, which was great. Um, I was so panicked and stressed though that it didn't feel like I was doing great. But like looking back, I'm like a little more charitable towards my old self. Um, so I booked some of those roles, like, and then I got into the production side of it actually before I moved out to LA. I had always acted. I had directed like one thing in college for a project for a class, and while I enjoyed it, I um, I always saw myself as like the guy that like would screw something up.
Mm.
And so I didn't trust myself to be like in a leadership position really. So it was like, for me, like performing was great and it still is great. But it was wonderful because like I didn't really have to think too much. I was just like, oh, I'm standing here. Oh, and I'm standing in the line right here. Great. I don't have to think about it too much. Great. And things just kind of happened. So I got the opportunity to work on a feature film in Jefferson City of all places. It's crazy. I was bartending at Eris's Bistro. This guy comes in, very quiet. Uh, I'm like, I engaged like a little small talk with him, but he's working and I kind of leave him alone. And he came back the next day and he came back the next day. And then he tells me he's staying at the hotel that's like right there across the street. Then he's here for work. I'm like, oh, cool, whatever. And then at the end of that week, he came in every day that week. Um, I bought him a glass of scotch and he and I were talking and he said, hey, Mark, do you know anybody in the area that's interested in the film industry? Because I'm a director and I'm shooting a feature film here. And I'm just having a hard time like finding people who are even interested. And I don't really know how to connect with the community. Like, do you know like where I could start? And I was like, oh, like I'm saving up money to move to Los Angeles for this.
It doesn't make sense that happened. That doesn't happen, man.
And
That's
he was
so
like,
crazy.
oh, well, that's pretty cool. So like, do you know like how to do crew work? And I was like, I can translate from a theater background. Um, and he said, great. And so I went in to his hotel room, not his hotel room. That sounds terrible. To like the lounge room in the
Let's
hotel.
breeze past it. Yeah.
Yep. Nothing to see here. And I did an audition for him, and he cast me as a production assistant, and I got to be a couple bit parts in the movie, which is great. I kept in touch with all those people. I still talk to those people to this day. We have like a Zoom group that like we started since like everybody, and that's quite rare to be in a project and have everybody still keep in touch. But a lot of those people became wonderful mentors for me, and it was lucky to move out to LA already with like a support system. Um, but yeah, so I worked as a PA on that movie. It's called The Haunting of Cell Block 11. Plug. If you wanna watch that, you can find it anywhere. But
Where can you stream it?
You can stream it on Amazon Prime right now.
Okay.
I think well, I won't speak to that because I don't know what deal that they have right now. You can either rent it or you can watch it streaming, one of the two, or on Hulu.
Google it. Go to Google and type in the movie and then read and figure it out.
For those local to Jeff City, it's fun because you see like the old penitentiary. You can see like the old like the diner called Dudley's in Apache Flats. That's heavily featured, like fun little things like that. So I made contact with that guy, moved out to LA, had some success, and then I worked all these like bogus BS jobs that like paid nothing, but like I scraped by with like no money for a long time. And I was working at a high-end restaurant in Santa Monica, this like legendary restaurant called Michael's, which is a fascinating chapter by itself. And I was feeling like dejected. I was like 26 or 27. I was seeing like all these people around me like having all this crazy success, and I barely had enough money to like get new headshots or like even take like an Uber to the audition. Like it was like it's barely scraping by, and I was thinking like, well, maybe I can like hack it in production for a little bit as a day job. And so like I floated out there like, can anybody get me a job working production? Because I hadn't worked on a movie since then, other than like little things that friends of mine were shooting and they needed someone to hold the microphone or adjust this light over here. And then that same guy, that director of that movie, Andrew Jones,
from back in Jeff City.
Yeah. He was an editor on Naked and Afraid. And he said, well, they're doing interviews for field associate producers if you want to apply. And I said, I don't know what that is, but yes, I will apply to that.
Job. Yeah.
And I booked that. And then that started me down a path where like I found myself in a position to where in May of 2019, since May of 2019, I've been working full time in the industry. Whereas before, the pattern had been like book a job, work that for a month, and then like you might not get anything else for 6 months, maybe even the year. And now I've transitioned to a point where I'm working production full time. I'm able to audition like in my time off. Um, actually it's great because of like me working in production, I've met all these people who've given me all these opportunities. Like the reason I have this nice mic right now is because later today I'm going to record some voiceover for a zombie movie that my friend is doing.
That's awesome.
So you meet all these people, just like you would any other job, and like because of the freelance nature of it, like those people take you to other jobs, but then you meet, that's the whole game of it, is getting yourself to a position where you're finally like on the dance floor. And it took me a long time to get there, but now I would say like in the last year and a half, I went from like working on like lower end stuff to like now I'm able to like work on some fun titles that people like actually know and have heard of and are excited.
That's wonderful, man. Yeah, and I mean, first of all, we talk all the time, and I've congratulated on this on your success a million times, but I guess publicly now, like, congrats, man. I think it's you're speaking about, like, when you were talking about overcoming the trials and tribulations and then getting like consistent work and where you're at now. I was thinking of the word courage, and I was thinking about what we were talking about earlier, growing up in Jefferson City and being in theater and like in exploring the arts, and like there being an underlying, like, you were kind of like, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I'm kind of like, I'm making meaning out of what you're saying and how I perceived it. Like you were saying, if people go through that, whether it's like debate or dance or improv or theater, like there's a certain element of courage and there's like a life skill in there, right? Like it teaches you to like, oh, I'm uncomfortable, I'm going to be courageous, I might fail. And that's that's life. Like that's going through the interview process. That's dating. That's anything. So, one, do you think your experience growing up contributed to the courage that you showed in those like later 20 years when things weren't going as well as you thought? And two, I don't think you'd ever outright say like, I thought about quitting, but like, did that ever cross your mind? Like, I'm not successful at this. Like, this isn't going to work out. Like, why do I even bother? Did that ever cross your mind?
I have yet to meet the creative person that isn't plagued by self-doubt.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My car broke down after moving here. My little nest egg of money that I'd squirreled away was like rapidly dwindling by the day. And and I was stuck like in a starving artist place for like years. And it is very tough to be in your mid 20s or your late 20s even. And you get on Facebook and like people that like are near and dear to you are having their second child and they bought a house, and she just made partner at her firm and he's doing this, and you're like,
I'm eating peanut butter and toast.
I had peanut butter and toast. Blake's laughing, but I eat peanut butter and toast twice a day for like 2 years because that's all I could afford to eat, really. And like that's not an exaggeration. Like I could not afford. If I like got like a ramen pack, I was like, we are living tonight.
Man,
yeah. It's tough not to like be filled with doubts and like to like not know anyone, and then like you take an acting class and like some like gorgeous guy from Australia who just moved here books something on HBO like the next week, and you're like, oh my God, like what like how much are you getting paid per episode? Are you joking? Like what? One episode, that's like half of what I'm gonna make this year. That's crazy. And it's such
sorry, go ahead.
It's just such a crazy like feast or famine like environment out here that like if you are going to have success, and I would say to anybody who's interested in this and is scared by what I'm saying, it is also my like firm held belief that if you stay out here long enough and you put in the work, you will find success. But like it is tough not to get mired down in that feeling of like, I'm not talented enough. I'm certainly not as handsome as that guy. That guy's voice sounds like butter when he talks. Jesus Christ. Like, and you're like seeing all these people in the hallway with you while you're auditioning, because you're all sitting there like reading over your lines to yourself, and you're just like, this is like great. This is crazy.
Y'all want the same thing. And
yeah.
And it's gonna be one person. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's like I don't know, there comes a point where you just got to bet on yourself, and despite not knowing like what the value that is. And for me, I was lucky enough to be supported enough to feel like I could keep going. Um, but it is not for the faint of heart, but the rewards are more than worth it.
Yeah, man. And I think, you know, I'm recollecting, I think it was Steve Carell who said it, and this is pulling from memory, and I'm probably going to butcher everything that he said. So if I had a fact checker, they'd probably obliterate this. But I remember him saying something in an interview one time, like they asked, because he didn't get famous, right, until he was like in his late 40s or like, but he did work on the Daily Show and a whole bunch of stuff. But I remember them saying like, what do you think set you apart from other people that haven't made it? And he basically just like said like it's like hard work, opportunity, and a little bit of luck, and eventually you're going to make it if you stick to it. But the majority of people don't stick to it because it's such a grind. And that's kind of what I hear you saying. Like you're putting in the work. You're like doing the things you have to do that are courageous. And if you just stick to it, like you're describing, like you've gotten consistent work, what, for the last 2 years now, going on 2 years.
Yeah.
It's a remarkable thing, man. And I think it's transferable to life too. It's just, it's putting in the time and like the ebbs and flows. There's always going to be lows. And again, I want to credit you, man. I think it's wonderful. It's a lot of courage. I think you're more inspiring for people than you even know, and people might even say. So kudos to you, man.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, man. I want to keep these things close to an hour, and we're coming up on an hour. But I want to give you the opportunity. I could not end this podcast talking to you, working in the film industry in Los Angeles, if I didn't have you share a story of some kind, either interacting with a celebrity, working on the set of a film, anything, like maybe working an event at the Grammys or something. Can you tell us a little story about something that's funny or kind of crazy that you can remember or pull from your memory that would be interesting to hear for our listeners here?
Sure. The first one that comes to mind, I didn't even tell you this yesterday when we were talking about this, but
okay.
I worked at my catering job at this event called the Spirit Awards, which is like the Academy Awards for independently produced films. So like if you're like a big studio, you don't qualify, but if you're Joe Schmo, you could qualify. And I found myself in the position of like bar manager that day. And there were like 11 bars all around. And like, I had to like kind of make sure that each of them like had enough ice, had enough product, that like they had like the support that they needed. So like, I've got like a walkie-talkie on and I'm running around and all these celebrities are showing up and it's fun. I mean, like, you know, McConaughey's right in front of you and Jared Leto's like, I mean, this right after Dallas Buyers Club too.
So sick.
So it was crazy. Like seeing the two of them there together, you know, Brad Pitt, the whole works. And so we're outside. It's like this big tent they had set up because they were going to be at another location, but it rained, so they located to this beach right on Santa Monica, put up this big tent. We're outside of it. I'm checking on one of the bars, and I hear a voice in my ear that I had been listening for all night. And it was John Hamm, because at the rehearsal that I had worked the night before, they've got all these like little cardboard cutouts of like their faces to show you where they're going to be sitting, because the camera guys have to rehearse like swinging to them when they're walking up to like present an award or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I knew John Hamm was going to show up, but like the event had been going on for like 4 hours and like I hadn't seen him, and I was like, oh god, it's the one I didn't even care about Brad Pitt, as weird as that is.
John Hamm's your guy. John Hamm's your guy.
I was like, Don Draper changed my life. I just have to be around him. And so I'm checking on this bar, and I hear it was the off season. It was like February, so it was the off season for baseball. But I hear someone say, "Hey Jason, how about those Dodgers?" Because something had happened in the off season, and I like heard the voice. I was like, "That's John Hamm talking," and I whip my head around, and it's John Hamm talking to Jason Bateman.
Oh my god!
And he's talking mad shit on the Dodgers and being like, Cardinals are going to just like have like it's gonna be a bloodbath when we play you. And Jason was like, "Fuck you and the Cardinals." And I just remember being like, "Oh, man, that's so crazy. They're right there talking about it."
I want to say something. I want to say something. I want to say something.
I so badly wanted to jump and be like, yeah, fuck the Dodgers.
Yeah.
But I didn't, and I'm glad. And that was like the first one that I was truly excited about. But yeah, I've had like a bunch of fun little weird things. I mean, I've met crazy big stars like Spielberg and Harrison Ford. I worked with Mel Gibson on a little thing, on like a movie like a couple months ago. That's all fine and well. I think the one that I think is the most entertaining is a fellow named Odin. And I was out drinking with a friend in Santa Monica after a frustrating shift at Michael's restaurant. And
Sure.
we're at the bar, and my buddy and I are like not in a good mood. So we're just there to have a beer, commiserate for a while, go home. And this like dude who's like super wasted at the end of the bar is like being really annoying to us, like from the moment we walk in.
Is
And
he
like,
just like talking to you guys? Like when you don't
oh
want to
yeah,
talk to you?
and
Yeah.
it's and he's got a scraggly beard, like his eyes are going in two different directions. He looks very disheveled.
Yeah.
And so we like order our beers, and he comes over and sits next to me. And what's funny is as we were entering the bar, I remember like complaining about the night at work and be like, man, why does weird shit always happen to me? I feel like I'm a magnet for weird people and personalities. Like, what is this? And then like a minute later, this dude's like glued to my side, and I was like, what the fuck? You see this? So we're talking to him, and he's like, hey man, that's a pretty cool hat you got on, man. And I was like, oh, thanks, dude. Yeah.
What was it?
I think I was like wearing like a weed company's hat that I got for free at like some event that I worked like
Sure.
catering.
Whatever. Yeah, it was a hat. Yeah.
And he's like, well, why are you doing it? Come over here, talk to me, man. And I was like, dude, no offense, I'm in a terrible mood. I just want to see her with my buddy. He's like, what's that? I can't hear. Hey, let me walk over. He walks over, and he goes, hey man, puts his hand out. He goes, what's your name? And I go, I'm Mark. And he goes, hey Mark, I'm Odin. Nice to meet you. And I go, hi Odin. Nice to meet you, Odin. And like he looks over across me at my friend. He's like, hey man, what's your name, man? Brian goes, hi, I'm Brian. Gives him like a half-hearted handshake, right?
So reluctant. Yeah.
And the guy goes, hey man, nice to meet you, Brian. I'm Odin, the original singer of Motley Crue. And we both go,
no.
Cool, man. Yeah. Hey, how was your time on Motley Crue, dude? Totally. Like being a total dick to this guy. And so anyway, like he goes off, like goes to the bathroom, and the bartender is like, he's crazy, but he legitimately has a really good singing voice. You should hear him sing sometime. And we were like, yeah, we'll totally go check out this guy while he sings. Absolutely. Like we're drinking our beers quickly to like get out.
Get the hell out of there. Yeah.
He comes back in, and he's like, hey Mike, I just wanted to talk to you about inviting you to my birthday party. And I was like, my name's Mark, not Mike. And maybe what? And he was like, I'm doing karaoke at Cabo Cantina. I can't wait to have you out there. And I was like, sure, dude. So he finishes his beer, we finish our beers, we go home. I am in bed, it's late, I'm like nodding off, and then like I don't know why, but I like thought and if I hadn't thought of it in that moment, I probably would have forgot about it forever. And I was like, well, let's give our old pal Odin a goog real quick and see what's going on. And I Googled, and that guy was 100% telling the truth. That guy used to be the lead singer of Motley Crue, did not get along well with the band because he was sober, very spiritual, and a total head case. And he would wear these like onesies that were not flattering to his like kind of chunky out of shape frame, and just like not the vibe that they were going with. But like he had these amazing pipes, so they were like, you're our singer, we can't find anybody else. And that guy got kicked out of the band because while they were recording their debut album, he refused to take off his signature white gloves to do the clapping portion of the song. And so he refused to take the gloves off to do the clapping because all the rest of them were playing instruments, and they didn't have money to do like a single track of like clapping.
Oh my God. Dude.
So
this is where I draw the line, the gloves.
So the guys at Motley Crue are like, fuck this and fuck you. And they like trashed the studio. And then like that week, their friend's band was playing, and it was like in a cover band, and the vocalist was out, but their friend's cousin, who was like crashing on his couch and just visiting Los Angeles, was going to fill in. So they watched this performance, and that was the lead, who ended up becoming the lead singer of Motley Crue. And they watched him perform and were like, who's this guy? So they came off stage, and their friend was like, oh yeah, if you're looking for anybody who's looking for a vocalist, like my cousin's pretty good, huh? And they were like, yeah, fuck Odin, and you're our guy, and would you like to record next week? And he was like, sure. And then they were Motley Crue like 6 months later, and they were like the biggest band on the planet. And then Odin is wandering the streets of Santa Monica, inviting people to karaoke at Cabo Cantina.
Did you go to Cabo Cantina for his birthday? Yes or no?
No, but I have seen him performing by Cabo Cantina, because by karaoke at Cabo Cantina, when he said that, I remember being like, they don't do karaoke at Cabo Cantina. And in front of the Cabo Cantina that he was mentioning is an area of Santa Monica called the Promenade, where you have like all these street performers, and he is out there with a karaoke machine just singing by himself. And
does he got pipes? Can he sing?
He's got a good voice. I mean, he's got a good voice.
I mean, he had to have it, you know, like,
yeah. But like, you know, Los Angeles is one of those weird towns just because like that's like a ghost of like American like music culture. Odin is like a casualty of a crazy time. And when you live in LA, you just never know like who you're talking to.
Literally,
that's what's exciting about living here. You could be talking to a crazy dude, Odin, who you're like, hey guy who smells bad and is kind of weird, like, could you please give us some space? And then you find out like, oh my god, that guy could have been like rock god in America. Just, it's crazy.
I feel like 95% of the time when you're in that scenario that your buddy's name's Brian, right?
Yeah.
That you and Brian were in, you're having that conversation. 95% of the time it's just some drunk guy like just acting a fool. But that the 5%,
you never know.
It's legit.
you really never know here.
Well, Mark, I appreciate you sharing the stories, and I genuinely appreciate you coming on. And when I start to have a lot of these, I'm hoping that, you know, your career is still going and you're still having a lot of success and consistency. And I'd love to have you back on, because I feel like we touched on a lot of good stuff today. And I think we could have dove in a lot deeper on a lot of the stuff. So I'd love to have you back on if you're interested.
Sure. I'd love to. All
right, man. Well, I appreciate it. Any final words from me?
I think what you're doing on this podcast is really exciting. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you do with it.
Cool. Thanks, pal. Appreciate everybody listening. Stay tuned for more later.